definition of resilience is the process of building skills to be able to endure hardship, which means that it is a short-term fix for many problems according to the Mayo Clinic staff. When discussing a species making short-term solutions for difficulties that they are facing in their surrounding environment, it can be described as phenotypic plasticity, an adaptation that occurs within an organism's lifetime. When an individual begins making these changes, other members of their group start to notice and sense, quote, "It would be very hard, if not impossible, for one alone to resist," the group starts adjusting along with them. As these adaptations continue spreading throughout the community, they are more likely to work their way to an evolution, or a genetic alteration that appears across several generations. So when we are discussing shifts made by an organism to survive, resilience can be viewed as the phenotypic changes because they are the short-term modifications, and evolution is the final adaptation, or genetic change, that the species makes. Because of the individual resilience that becomes more noticeable as the environment surrounding organisms change, group adaptations are able to be seen through both phenotypic plasticity and evolution. First, I will be discussing the artifacts that I chose to connect to my investigative question: Urban Evolution, How Species Adapt to Survive in Cities by Eric Bender, and Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. In Urban Evolution, Bender discussed all sorts of different species and how they were forced to adapt to the urbanization of the environment surrounding them. Because evolution can be viewed as a form of natural selection, only the fittest will survive. This is why individuals within a community must be willing to make phenotypic changes if they wish to continue living in their current environment. In Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, he discusses what it is like having to spend 27 years in prison. During those years, he was forced to make certain changes to his lifestyle in order to survive, most importantly, growing an understanding of what the authorities in the prison were looking for and how he could achieve these goals. By following these guidelines, Mandela made resilient changes to his lifestyle, which many of the prisoners decided to follow because they saw the success that was coming to him. These changes never quite made it to the adaptation phase, as he was taken out of the prison environment, no longer needing to evolve, but changes such as phenotypic adjustments could be seen as Mandela acclimated within his lifetime. Upon coming to this connection, I decided to do more research to find out how other species around the world are willing to make adjustments to their environments. To start, I decided to delve more into the lifestyle of water fleas, or Daphnia magna, which were discussed by Bender in Urban Evolution. These organisms prefer to live in freshwater habitats and cold temperatures. Researchers Christine Brands and Lucht and Meester found many colonies that were living in rural ponds, shallow bodies of water with an average temperature of 20 degrees Celsius, and compared them to the water fleas that were found to be living in urban environments, shallow bodies of water with an average temperature of 24 degrees Celsius. Some communities of this organism were forced into resilience as they were moved into more urban environments. With the temperatures shifting to make the water warmer, many eventual genetic shifts occurred. The most major of them was that they matured at a faster rate. This means that they had to speed up their life cycle in order for their offspring to be produced in the proper environment. Other major changes include a higher population growth rate and that the peak size during maturity was much smaller in urban areas than in rural areas. These last two forms of evolution are a direct result of the phenotypic plasticity change of a shorter developmental time. While Daphnia magna colonies were living in urban settings, they were able to adjust to the higher temperatures and greater amount of pollution by shortening the amount of time that it took for them to reach different forms of maturity within their lifetime. This then developed into a genetic change within that colony of water fleas. The individual phenotypic plasticity of the one colony of Daphnia magna helped to create a genetic change for future generations of the species to be able to better survive if they were placed in an urban environment. Another species I found that have endured changes in their environments are ants. According to researcher Sylvian Lund, there is a standard trait among this species that is called developmental recombination, in which, quote, evolutionary novelty may result from the recombination of ancestral phenotypes following changes in the timing or the location of pre-existing developmental processes. This explains how different colonies of ants adapt to fill the roles needed depending on the environment. In certain colonies, there are several different castes of ants, which started as a phenotypic change, only affecting that one colony, but became an adaptation as future generations started working in the same way. The top of the caste system is always the queen, who is responsible for the reproduction and aerial dispersals. Then there are the workers, who are responsible for brood care, defense, construction, cleaning, and foraging. Depending on the environment, the queen could either have wings or not have wings, and either produce one pheromone or another. If the queen is to have wings, then the worker ants will not, but if the queen doesn't have wings, then the worker ants will. This adaptation among ant colonies affects the way they reproduce and disperse materials. These are all affected by the surrounding environment, as the ants' hormones change depending on the ecosystems in which they are placed. These patterns are then relayed in their DNA, which shows an adaptation, or a genetic change that will affect the future generations. These caste systems are a strong representation of the developmental recombination that is often present in ants, as individual organisms made phenotypic changes to be better suited for the jobs they were required to perform. These changes developed into full-blown adaptations, rewriting their DNA sequence to better suit the environment. There are several pros and cons when it comes to resilience and adaptation. The pros include species being able to survive longer in different environments than ones they were originally accustomed to. Species being able to spread across the world, which makes them more obtainable to many different people, and being able to survive as invasive species attempt to take over the ecosystem that they are inhabiting. The cons include that it is much easier for a certain species to become invasive against another group within their environment if the other species are unwilling to be resilient to their changes, and a lack of genetic diversity among a community of organisms. Both of these limitations make it very difficult for organisms to work through new climates that may be affecting the environment that they are accustomed to. Resilience is common among many species, especially those that can be found all across the globe. When these organisms are pushed to face adversity, their species, especially those that are living in the community around them, benefit from it. The short-term solutions created through perseverance allow communities to unite with each other for the betterment of the entire species. These short-term solutions then evolve into long-term genetic adaptations, making future generations more prepared for the tasks to come. In this way, they are able to focus on being resilient towards the threats that come their way during their own lifetime, rather than having to adapt to the situations that their ancestors have already endured. This is how resilience is able to help form group adaptations, most specifically through the adaptation processes of phenotypic plasticity and evolution.
All right, a couple of questions. What evidence did you gather that you didn't include, and why didn't you include it?
I came up with a few different species in regards to their resilience in certain environments. One that I decided not to include, sea grapes, was able to be seen as resilient as it adapted to different environments all around the world. I chose not to include this because it felt as though it didn't connect as strongly to the artifacts as my other examples, and I also believe that it would have been repetitive, as many of the changes would resemble that of the water fleet.
Okay, thank you. How was your conclusion in conversation with the body of literature or other research sources you examined?
My conclusion agreed with most of the bodies of literature that I decided to examine for my research. I decided to base my answer to my investigative question off of the research that I came across because I felt that it was the best way to prove how important resilience is to adaptations in certain environments. There was one body of literature that I decided not to include because it didn't follow my conclusion.
Thank you. Another round of applause.